Every narcissist has a weak spot they'll never admit to. They can endure criticism, accusations, even outright anger. But there's one thing they cannot handle: being exposed. When their mask is ripped away, everything their power rests on begins to collapse. At first glance, exposing a narcissist might feel like a long-awaited victory. It's the moment when you finally call things by their real names, pointing directly to their manipulation, catching them in a lie, or showing that you see more than they wanted you to. For you, it may feel like a release, like a heavy weight has finally been lifted. But for the narcissist, it becomes the worst possible scenario. Why? Because exposure doesn't just strike at a single action or word. It cuts into the foundation their entire identity is built upon. For them, it isn't simply an argument or a disagreement. It's a blow to their power, to their carefully crafted image, and to their sense of importance. Picture an actor who has been playing the same role on stage for years. He knows every line by heart, knows exactly when the audience should laugh, when they should cry. But suddenly someone in the crowd shouts, "This is just an act." He's not a hero. He's just a man in costume. In that instant, not only does the performance collapse, but so does the illusion that made the audience believe. That's what exposure feels like to a narcissist, as if their mask has been torn away in front of everyone. Carl Jung wrote that every person, sooner or later, must face their shadow. Those parts of the self we reject, suppress, or fear to acknowledge. It could be weakness, envy, fear, or the painful sense of insignificance. For a healthy person, confronting the shadow, while difficult, can lead to growth and self-understanding. But the narcissist avoids this encounter at all costs. Instead, they construct a grand persona, a public mask meant to hide the emptiness inside. And in the moment of exposure, that shadow breaks through. The vulnerability, the fear of being nothing. The inner emptiness they worked so hard to conceal. Suddenly, it's visible. For them, it's not just discomfort. It's catastrophe. And that is why exposing a narcissist is never calm or simple. It triggers a chain reaction where their fears, defenses, and survival mechanisms all burst to the surface. First of all, let's look at the mask and how fragile it really is. A narcissist builds their entire life around a grand persona. Carl Jung used the word persona to describe the mask we present to the world, the social role, the image we use to interact with society. For a healthy person, the persona is only one part of a larger whole. It's the professional face at work, the friendly face among friends, the caring face at home. But for the narcissist, things are very different. Without a solid inner core, their entire sense of self rests on this mask. This persona must appear strong, confident, flawless. It says, "I am always right. I am special. I stand above the rest." And the more people believe in this image, the more the narcissist feels validated. But the moment someone dares to question them, to point out a contradiction, or to look closer, cracks begin to show on the surface. Picture the display window of an expensive boutique. From the outside, it's polished, elegant, and perfectly arranged down to the smallest detail. But step behind the curtain, and you might find emptiness and chaos. Exposure for the narcissist is exactly that moment, when someone stops admiring the window dressing and looks behind it, discovering the truth. In relationships, this becomes painfully clear. Imagine a narcissist bragging about their uniqueness, their connections, their endless victories. But their partner, who knows the facts, calmly says, "Wait a minute. That's not how it really happened." In that instant, the narcissist's world begins to collapse. What was supposed to strengthen their image of being invincible now dissolves into an empty shell. The same pattern plays out in professional settings. A narcissistic manager carefully cultivates the image of a visionary, a flawless leader. But when a colleague points out a mistake in their calculations or highlights a gap between their words and their actions, it's not received as minor feedback. It feels like a personal disaster. Because to them, even the smallest crack in the mask threatens to bring the entire structure crashing down. This is why exposure is never just criticism for a narcissist. It's a direct threat to the entire identity they've built. If the mask falls, the illusion of power falls with it. And behind that mask lies everything they fear most: emptiness, vulnerability, and the fragile truth they've tried to hide from the world. Next comes the anger and the urge for payback. A narcissist's first reaction to being exposed is almost always explosive. The moment their mask is seen through, they feel humiliated, insulted, and stripped of power. That feeling quickly transforms into the desire to punish the one who dared to break their illusion. This anger can show up in many ways. In close relationships, it's sudden outbursts, yelling, accusations, blaming. The narcissist might throw out lines like, "You're twisting everything. You're the one manipulating me," even though they were the one pulling the strings all along. In a workplace, it often sounds like a sharp retort at a colleague, "You don't know what you're talking about. You have no right to criticize me." The voice gets louder, the tone harsher. Volume becomes a weapon, pressure becomes a shield. But behind all that noise, there is no real strength. It's panic. Exposure signals to the narcissist that control is slipping away. The mask they built their power on begins to crack, and every crack threatens to bring the whole structure crashing down. Carl Jung wrote that the collapse of the persona, the outer mask we present to the world, is experienced by the psyche as a threat to existence itself. For the narcissist, this is especially unbearable, because the persona is almost all they have. Picture an actor on stage, flawlessly delivering his lines, when suddenly someone in the audience shouts, "This isn't real." In that instant, the performance collapses. The carefully rehearsed illusion shatters. The actor may lash out, argue, accuse the heckler of disrespect. But the reaction always has the same goal: to silence the threat, to regain control, to make the audience believe in the role once again. That is exactly what happens with the narcissist. Their anger isn't true strength, it's desperation. The shouting, the accusations, even intimidation are attempts to scare you into retreat, to make you doubt yourself, so their power can be restored. But here's the paradox. The more furious their reaction, the clearer it becomes. You've touched the most vulnerable place they've been trying to protect all along. And then comes the breaking point, the moment when control slips away. Exposure threatens the very foundation on which the narcissist's identity rests. That carefully constructed image they've built begins to crack, and with it crumbles their belief in their own unshakable strength. What once seemed eternal, their confidence, their authority, their sense of importance, suddenly comes into question. At that moment, what the narcissist has spent a lifetime hiding begins to break through. Feelings of worthlessness, shame, and the terror of being nobody. This is why their reaction is so intense and out of proportion. They're not simply arguing with you. They're fighting for their very sense of reality. Think of a house of cards. From the outside, it looks impressive, floor upon floor, like a delicate little palace. But the entire structure rests on fragile foundations. A single breath of air, one light touch, and the whole thing collapses. Exposure works in exactly the same way. One word, one undeniable fact, and the entire system that held up their sense of power starts to fall apart. In relationships, you can see it when a partner calmly says, "You're lying to me, and I know it." In that instant, the narcissist loses the ground beneath their feet. Their usual playbook, sparking guilt, provoking explanations, pulling you into justification, stops working. Instead, silence fills the space. And in that silence, one truth hangs in the air. They are no longer in control. In the workplace, the pattern is the same. Imagine a narcissistic boss making a statement to emphasize their authority and competence. Then a colleague asks a simple question that exposes a mistake. The room goes quiet. And suddenly, it's clear. This leader is not as flawless as they wanted everyone to believe. For most people, that would be a chance to admit the error and correct it. But for the narcissist, it's catastrophe, because their image as the all-knowing authority has just been cracked. Here we can return again to Carl Jung. He wrote that the confrontation with the shadow is inevitable. The shadow holds everything we reject and bury inside ourselves. A healthy person, though painfully, can learn to acknowledge and integrate it into their personality. But the narcissist avoids this encounter at all costs. Their shadow is filled with emptiness, insignificance, and shame. Exposure becomes a forced confrontation with that shadow. And instead of growth, they experience it as destruction, as the end of everything that supported their fragile sense of reality. This is why the loss of control is unbearable for them. They cannot admit a mistake. They cannot allow themselves to appear weak. They cannot accept vulnerability. For them, that is equal to disappearing altogether. And so, the more control slips away, the more desperate and extreme their attempts to seize it back become. After the anger fails, the tactics change, and manipulation takes center stage. When direct aggression doesn't work, the narcissist often shifts strategy. In that moment, they may suddenly drop the mask of rage and put on another, one of softness, concern, even apparent care. It can feel as if you're suddenly dealing with a completely different person. Their voice becomes calm, their gaze appears warm, their words turn gentle. But the goal is simple: to make you doubt what just happened. The narcissist begins to persuade, "You misunderstood. You're overreacting. I was only trying to help." Sometimes they'll even insist, "I've always been on your side. You just don't see it." On the surface, this sounds like reconciliation. But in reality, it's not care. It's not understanding. It's gaslighting. The classic form of manipulation designed to make you question your own memory, your own perception, and even your sanity. Imagine a situation in a relationship. A partner says, "You humiliated me in front of our friends." The narcissist smiles and replies, "Come on, it was just a joke." You're too sensitive. Instead of taking responsibility, they rewrite reality. And the partner is left thinking, maybe I am exaggerating? Maybe I did take it too seriously? That is the goal: to erase the truth and impose their version of events. In the workplace, it shows up differently, but with the same purpose. A colleague points out a discrepancy in a report where the narcissist deliberately twisted the numbers. Instead of admitting the error, the narcissist responds calmly, "You're looking at the figures the wrong way." Let me explain. Then, with confidence, they reorganize the facts until the picture is flipped upside down. And if the colleague isn't fully certain, they might actually believe they misunderstood, when in reality the manipulation is deliberate. Carl Jung wrote that projection is the mechanism by which a person unloads their inner chaos onto others. The narcissist does this constantly. Their lies, their emptiness, their confusion, they project it all onto you in order to preserve the illusion of wholeness. It's as if they're saying, "I'm not the one lying, you're the one imagining things. I'm not the one who's confused. You're the one who can't see clearly." Responsibility shifts onto someone else, and the mask of the narcissist remains intact. The result is doubt and disorientation for the victim. That moment of exposure, which seconds ago seemed so clear, begins to blur. And that's exactly what the narcissist wants, to erase the line between truth and falsehood, until they once again control how you see reality. Then comes the attempt at repair, the so-called rehabilitation. Sometimes after the outbursts and manipulations, the narcissist shifts into yet another role, the role of the good person. On the surface, it looks like an attempt at rehabilitation, as if they genuinely want to show you, or everyone around them, that they're not really so bad after all. They may appear with gifts, with sudden gestures of care, with promises to change. They say things like, "I understand now. I've learned my lesson. It won't happen again. I was just under a lot of pressure." In these moments, they play the part of someone remorseful, someone willing to admit their mistakes. But it's important to see it clearly. This isn't true accountability. It's strategy. The goal is simple: to regain influence and convince you to believe in their perfect image once again. Think of how this looks in personal relationships. After a heated argument, the narcissist may suddenly organize a romantic evening, bring flowers, or offer an expensive gift. They'll say all the right words. "You mean everything to me. I don't want to lose you." But this moment is not really about you. It's about them. They're terrified of losing control, of losing the audience that validates their mask. And so they're willing to adjust their behavior temporarily, just long enough to restore the balance of power. In the workplace, it shows up differently. A narcissistic colleague or boss who's been caught in dishonesty or exposed in a mistake may suddenly reinvent themselves as the friendly teammate. They bring coffee, crack jokes to lighten the mood, or openly support others in meetings. From the outside, it looks like a real change of character. But in reality, it's the same play in a new costume. As soon as trust begins to return, the old patterns resurface. Carl Jung wrote that the persona is the mask we present to the world, the social storefront that others see. For a healthy person, the persona is only one part of a whole. But for the narcissist, the persona becomes their entire sense of self. That is why this so-called rehabilitation is nothing more than a repair job on the storefront, a quick repaint of the facade. And behind that facade remains the same shadow: the fear of worthlessness, the emptiness, the chaos they cannot face. This attempt at rehabilitation can be disorienting. The partner, colleague, or friend begins to think, maybe they've really changed. Maybe this time will be different, but the truth is simpler. It's just another tactic to maintain control. When you expose a narcissist, their reaction can take many different forms. It might be a furious outburst of anger, an attempt to pin all the blame on you, or a carefully staged performance of self-pity. Sometimes they turn to manipulation, shifting masks to confuse you. Other times, they retreat into silence, as if trying to punish you by withholding any response at all. But no matter how different these outward reactions may look, they all spring from the same source: fear. Fear of losing power, fear of losing significance, fear of no longer having control over you or over the situation. For the narcissist, exposure is like a blinding spotlight on stage. Suddenly, the audience doesn't see the shining actor in full costume, but the shaken figure of a person who's been stripped of their role. Carl Jung wrote that a person cannot become whole until they face their shadow, the hidden parts of the self that we deny and fear. For the narcissist, however, exposure is not a step toward growth. It is a forced collision with the emptiness they've been running from all their life. Their shadow is filled with vulnerability, with feelings of worthlessness, with the panic of rejection. And the moment you call things by their true name, you place them face to face with that shadow. That's why their reactions are so intense and so painful to watch. They're not ready to accept the truth, because truth destroys the illusion they've worked so hard to protect. They're not prepared for self-reflection, because self-reflection threatens the mask that defines them. For them, exposure is not an opportunity to change. It is a catastrophe that must be stopped at any cost. Image the scene. A puppeteer pulls the strings, and the puppet dances just as they want. But suddenly, the puppet stops moving, and the audience sees the hand that was pulling the strings all along. In that moment, the puppeteer no longer seems all-powerful. They are simply a person who has lost control. And that is exactly what happens to the narcissist when they are exposed. The louder the protests, the harsher the accusations, the more dramatic the scenes, the clearer it becomes. You've touched their most vulnerable spot. You've lifted the mask and looked into the place they themselves have never dared to face.